I stood at the sink, my hands still damp from washing their plates, as my son looked me in the eye and said it, "We're done helping you." The same son whose mortgage I signed for, whose insurance bills I paid in silence, whose wife sat beside him nodding like they were delivering mercy instead of betrayal. After years of carrying them, quietly and completely, I was now too expensive to keep. They thought they were cutting me off. They didn't realize I'd been holding them up, and I was about to let go. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Barbara had laid out the dinner table like it still meant something. Cloth napkins, the heavy ceramic dishes, the good glasses with the faint gold rim that caught the dim light just so. The roast chicken had barely cooled when the doorbell rang, sharp and early, like Dean couldn't wait to get it over with. Melanie stepped in first, her heels clicking across the hardwood like punctuation. She barely glanced at the framed photos on the hallway wall, Barbara and Alan with Ruby at the lake, a 4th of July cookout from a happier year. Dean followed with a 6-pack of craft beer under one arm and a tight smile that didn't touch his eyes. Barbara opened her arms, but neither of them moved in for a hug, so she let her arms fall. Dinner was mostly chewing. Melanie asked about Ruby's job hunt without listening to the answer. Dean nodded at the chicken, muttering, "This is good," before turning his focus back to his phone screen. Barbara caught Ruby giving her a look from across the table, the kind that says, "I'm trying." And Barbara smiled softly, just enough to say me too. Then, as the last bite was swallowed and the plate still sat warm and crusted with sauce, the tone shifted. "So," Melanie said, brushing non-existent crumbs from her lap, "we've been running numbers." Dean cleared his throat. "We're just stretched thin right now. Mortgage jumped again. Max's braces, Ellie's summer camp deposit. It's a lot." Barbara nodded slowly. "Of course it's expensive. I understand." Melanie leaned forward. "That's why we can't help with anything else. Not errands, not rides, not money. We're tapped." Dean gave a sympathetic chuckle, like a man delivering a layoff. "You should really think about downsizing. Something more manageable. We're done helping you." The air stilled. Even the faint ticking of the wall clock seemed louder. Barbara blinked once, just once. Then she nodded. "Thank you for letting me know," she said, her voice quiet but intact, not a crack in it. She began stacking plates like it was any other Tuesday. Melanie stood. Dean shoved his chair back with that careless scrape that always set Barbara's teeth on edge. Neither of them offered to help clean. They gathered their things and said their goodbyes like tourists departing a museum. When the front door clicked shut, the silence wasn't empty. It was personal. Barbara stood still in the kitchen, one hand on the back of a dining chair, the other gripping a plate like it might shatter in her palm. Ruby rose from her seat slowly. "That was—" Ruby started, but her voice broke. She tried again. "That was hard to watch. I'm sorry," Barbara didn't answer. She just turned toward the sink and ran the water. Not hot, just cold enough to keep her awake. The screen door rattled as the wind picked up outside, and somewhere deep in Barbara's chest, something tightened, then shifted. Not like grief, not like heartbreak. No, this was something else. Something that didn't blink anymore. Barbara didn't sleep that night, not out of sorrow. She sat in the den long after Ruby had gone to bed, legs tucked under her on the couch. A fleece throw wrapped around her shoulders like armor. A legal pad balanced on her knees. The clock above the fireplace ticked steadily into the small hours, but she didn't feel time passing. The house was silent, eerily so, like it was holding its breath with her. In front of her, the leather-bound folder hadn't moved. It had been sitting at the back of the filing cabinet for years, tucked behind old tax returns and Alan's hospice paperwork. She'd touched it earlier that evening with a kind of reverence, then carried it to the den like a priest might carry a chalice. She opened it now, carefully, like something sacred or dangerous. The first page, Deed of Trust, dated 2004. Primary owner, Barbara Elaine McConnell. Co-owner, Dean Alexander McConnell. Barbara traced her name with one finger, not out of nostalgia, but confirmation. The ink hadn't faded. Neither had her rights. Dean and Melanie had long ago stopped asking who held what. They assumed. They coasted. Second document, Lemon Heights duplex. A modest 2-unit rental near the freeway. Purchased right after Alan's first surgery, when they'd started thinking about passive income, just in case. Dean had found the place, but it was Barbara who had secured the financing, done the paperwork, met with the contractor after hours, while Alan napped, post-op, on the couch. She flipped again. Third tab. Their house. Dean and Melanie's dream home. Wraparound porch, 2 fireplaces, 4 bedrooms they didn't really need. And there, again, in clean black type, Barbara McConnell, co-signer. Not Melanie, not even in small print. She closed her eyes and saw it all, Dean red-faced at the credit union, whispering across the desk that Melanie's score had taken a hit after that second bankruptcy. The soft way he'd said, "We'd never ask if we had another option, Barb," and how she had nodded, numb and tired, thinking it would just be temporary, that they'd do right by her eventually. They never did. Barbara stood up, walked quietly into the kitchen, and poured herself a cup of coffee from the French press she'd set earlier. Cold now, bitter, she didn't flinch. She took it black and went back to the den, where she opened her spiral-bound ledger, the one nobody ever asked about. She flipped to this year, 1,327.41 tartar. July mortgage transfer, DH, 112 $12. August duplex repair, HVAC split unit, 2,004 separate cars. September property tax, Lemon Heights, 380.90. Melanie's insurance premium, auto lapsed, page after page, precise, dated, labeled. They thought her name was just symbolic, but she'd been the one keeping the lights on. Her phone buzzed on the table. Janice. Barbara answered without looking. "Just got back from yoga," Janice said, feeling flexible and vengeful. "You ready to talk strategy?" Barbara didn't smile, but her eyes sparked. "I pulled the documents. They're worse off than I remembered. Melanie's name isn't on a single deed. Dean only has partial equity, on paper." Janice let out a soft whistle. "So they thought they were holding you up. Cute." "They've been swimming with a raft I built. Time to let it drift." Janice paused. "You sure about this?" Barbara took a slow sip of coffee, then set the mug down beside the legal pad. "I gave them every chance to show up. I let them walk all over the truth. And now they're telling me to downsize, that they're done helping me?" "You're not angry," Janice observed. "That's what's terrifying." "No," Barbara agreed. "I'm not. I'm clear." She flipped to Thursday in her planner and circled the 9:30 slot twice. "Call Lyle Tran, doc review plus next steps folder ready, ledger organized." She clicked her pen shut with a soft snap. In the quiet of the house, the sound was sharp as a match strike. Lyle had been Alan's attorney for the last 15 years. Estate planning, contract negotiations, the revocable trust they never told Dean or Melanie about. He was discreet, sharp, and he owed her one. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Ruby, probably. Or the house shifting again. Barbara didn't move. She stared through the dark window, where the street lamp glowed against the October mist like a stage light waiting for its scene. The act had changed. The roles had reversed. And this time, Barbara wasn't the safety net. She was the storm coming for the ones who had mistaken her silence for surrender. Barbara rose early, long before the neighborhood stirred. The sunrise pushed pale light through the blinds, casting long, slatted shadows across the kitchen tile. Her coffee brewed slow and strong, but she wasn't waiting on it. She was already at the dining table, glasses perched low on her nose, phone in one hand, stylus in the other. She tapped the final digit into her banking app, then paused before pressing send. Recipient: Ruby McConnell, amount $2,500, memo, apt deposit and first month, do not share. Her finger hovered. She wasn't second-guessing. She was marking the moment. A choice made, a final act of grace. Click. Transaction complete. Barbara logged it in her ledger, exact as always. August 12th, Ruby apt wire, final discretionary payment. She underlined final twice, not out of drama, out of clarity. There would be no more unacknowledged lifelines, no more silent rescues. This was the last of it. a gift for the only person in that entire bloodline who had tried, even feebly, to understand. She closed the ledger, smoothed the cover with her palm, and exhaled. Her phone buzzed again, right on schedule. Lyle Tran, 9:30 a.m. confirmed. 10 minutes later, she sat in his downtown office, a clean spare room full of air and light. His desk was uncluttered, as always, except for a small crystal paperweight shaped like a chess pawn. Lyle didn't deal in power plays, he dealt in endgames. He looked over her folder, eyebrows rising with each page. "Barbara," he said finally, tapping a signature line with his pen, "you are the financial spine of their life. I hope you know that." Barbara gave a short, soft laugh. "They don't, but I do." Lyle pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose. "You've carried their mortgage, their insurance, maintenance costs, property taxes. You own one of their rental properties outright. Melanie's name isn't even listed on anything that could float her." "I know," Barbara said, calm. "That's why I'm here." He nodded. "Okay, first step, partition paperwork. We'll file clean legal separation of ownership, financial withdrawal, severance of co-responsibility, and forfeiture of benefit rights from shared property usage. You'll remain a creditor, not a benefactor." Barbara didn't flinch. "I want it airtight." "It will be," he said. "They won't be able to refinance without you. They won't qualify for aid without your signature. And if they try to sell anything you're tied to—" "I'll freeze it before the ink dries," Barbara said, meeting his gaze. Lyle's mouth twitched into the closest thing he had to admiration. "Well, I underestimated you, Barbara." "No," she said. "You just believed the version of me I used to need to be." She left his office with the document checklist in her purse and a legal roadmap in her hand. Her heels clicked steadily down the marble hallway of the building, each step deliberate, each breath measured. Outside, the sky was glassy blue, cool but not cold. Autumn trying on winter's coat. Back home, she made tea this time, sat by the window, pulled out a fresh legal pad. She wrote, underlined, boxed, asset liquidation schedule, rental property, sell or transfer title, phase 2. Remove name from DH mortgage, start process. Convert shared account to personal trust. Revoke financial power of attorney privileges. Terminate insurance copays. Notify HOA. Name removal. Each item was a nail, each step, a swing of the hammer, not vengeance, accounting, not fury. Closure. At 2:17 p.m., she received a text from Melanie. "Hey, could you maybe cover the car payment this month? We're waiting on Dean's bonus to clear, just until the 20th. Barbara stared at the screen. No punctuation, no pleasantries, no acknowledgement of the dinner. The awkward silence, the cuts delivered with a polite smile. She didn't reply, not yet. Instead, she opened her financial app, opened the autopay tab, and with 3 clicks, ended the recurring payment. A red line flashed across the screen. Automatic transfer canceled, effective immediately. She smiled. Not bitter, not smug, just done. From the hallway, Ruby emerged, hair damp, backpack slung over one shoulder. "I was thinking of looking at that place in Silver Pines this weekend," she said, cautiously, not meeting her mother's eyes. "Might be small, but it's on the bus line," and Barbara stood, walked over, tucked a loose strand of hair behind Ruby's ear like she had when she was little. "You don't owe me an explanation, sweetie," she said softly. "Just don't look back once you leave." Ruby blinked. "Wait, did you—" "I took care of it," Barbara said. "But don't tell them. Let them keep believing the lifeboat's coming." She turned back to the window. The street was quiet, but a storm was rising in her chest now, slow, certain, controlled. This wouldn't end in screaming matches. There would be no slammed doors, no begging. This would end on paper, before it ended in person. The HOA letter sat unopened on the kitchen counter for 3 days. It had arrived in a crisp white envelope, corner stamped with the seal of Oakview Estates. Barbara recognized it immediately. Standard quarterly notification, probably about dues or a landscaping issue. But Barbara didn't open it. She knew what it was. And she didn't care. Let them follow up. Let them wonder why the woman who'd always been first to respond, first to pay, first to show up with cookies at the annual meeting, was suddenly silent. She owed no one in that neighborhood anything. Not anymore. That morning, Barbara walked into her local bank branch, the one with the forest green awning and the sharp scent of eucalyptus, always wafting from the entry diffuser. Everyone there knew her by name. Half the staff had known Alan. Tamara Holt greeted her behind the counter with a practiced smile that slipped into real warmth when she saw who it was. "Barbara McConnell," she said. "You've been quiet lately." Barbara smiled. "Just tightening things up." Tamara motioned her toward a side office. "Let's sit down and see what you need." They settled in. The room was glass-walled, bright with midday sun. Tamara opened Barbara's profile on the monitor and blinked. "Looks like you've got 8 recurring drafts tied to this main account. 4 to property services. One's the HOA, I assume. And, she leaned in. 3 are auto payments on vehicle loans." Barbara leaned forward. "Show me who's listed." Tamara clicked into the details, her brow furrowing. "One of these is to Dean McConnell's lender. Looks like an SUV refinance. $497 AAT monthly. Started last year. Co-signed under your name. The credit approval's tied to your score." Barbara's stomach didn't drop. It didn't even shift. She just exhaled, quietly. "He didn't ask," she said, more to herself than Tamara. Tamara hesitated. "I shouldn't say this, but that lender only approved the new loan because of your financial history. Without it, his file would have been flagged." Barbara nodded once. "Then flag it now." Tamara blinked. "Sorry?" "Freeze it," Barbara said. "No auto renewals, no extensions, no future lines under my name. If they call, you tell them the bank wants updated guarantor documentation, and I won't be submitting any." Tamara straightened. "Understood." Barbara tapped her fingers once against the desk. "I'm not a bank," she said softly. "Not anymore." Tamara clicked a few final buttons, then looked up. "It's done. He won't even know it's frozen until the next billing cycle." Barbara stood. "Perfect." As she left the branch, her phone buzzed. A text from Janice. "You at the bank?" Barbara replied with one word. "Yes." Seconds later, her phone rang. She answered as she stepped into the parking lot. "You just turned off their faucet," Janice said. "Let's watch the thirst kick in." Barbara smiled, shielding her eyes from the glare of the sun. "They won't even notice. Not yet." Janice gave a low laugh. "I'll bring popcorn when the panic sets in." "I'm counting on it," Barbara said. By the time she pulled back into her driveway, she saw the mail carrier walking away from her box. She waited until they turned the corner before retrieving the stack. Among the grocery ads and credit card promos was another white envelope, identical to the last. She walked it to the trash, tore it in two, and dropped it without a second glance. Back inside, she opened her laptop and refreshed the dashboard on her portfolio. Her savings was untouched, investments steady. Passive income still humming from the duplex. Everything was where it needed to be, except them. The illusion they'd lived under, that she would always say yes, always pick up the pieces, always sign the dotted line, that illusion had just been severed at the neck. She imagined Dean sitting in his SUV, texting someone about fantasy football, unaware that the loan he refinanced was now one glitch away from default. She imagined Melanie trying to schedule a dentist appointment for Ellie, only to find her old insurance card declined. That moment was coming, but not yet. Barbara was patient. She wanted them to feel the cracks, not all at once, but as a slow, creeping awareness, like waking up underwater. Upstairs, the washer clicked off. The spin cycle stilled. She went to fold towels, humming something tuneless under her breath. The kind of habit she'd always done without thinking. But now it felt like a rhythm, a tempo. She was keeping time. And time was running out for Dean and Melanie. The certified letters went out on a Thursday morning. Barbara watched the postal clerk weigh each envelope, print the green and white slips, and press the round date stamp into the corner like a seal of finality. Each envelope was heavy, physically, legally, symbolically. Lyle had called them termination packets. Barbara called them closure, one for Dean and Melanie's house, one for the Lemon Heights duplex, one for the shared equity account she was about to untether. As the clerk slid them into the outgoing bin, Barbara didn't look away. She wanted to see the exact moment they disappeared behind the metal slot. The sound it made, a small, mechanical click, felt cleaner than any apology she'd ever given in her life. When she stepped back into the parking lot, the morning was still gray and cool, the air faintly metallic with rain. Her phone buzzed. Lyle Tran. Certified mail receipts confirmed. She opened the message and saw the tracking numbers, each one time-stamped and verified. Then another message followed, short and efficient. They'll receive by Saturday. Expect noise by Monday. Barbara typed back, understood. Then she slid her phone into her purse and drove home, radio off, window cracked. The first drops of rain hit her windshield just as she pulled into her driveway. Inside, the house smelled faintly of lavender and starch. She set her purse down, made a cup of chamomile tea, and carried it to her desk. The folder was already waiting, her copy of the packet, signed and notarized. She checked off each item in her ledger as she sipped. Property exit notice filed. Cosigner revocation acknowledged. Credit liability split initiated. Financial indemnity clause activated. Each line brought a small, quiet satisfaction, not the giddy kind, but the stillness that follows a wound finally closing. By late afternoon, the email notification came through. Confirmation of receipt. McConnell, Dean, and Melanie, Oakview address. Barbara downloaded the attached PDF and stored it in her fireproof lockbox. She closed the lid, turned the key, and slipped it onto her chain with the others. Then she sat for a moment, listening to the ticking of the mantel clock. The storm had thickened outside, rain smearing the world into streaks of gray. It was almost peaceful. Saturday morning, at the other end of town, Dean and Melanie stood in their kitchen, side by side, staring at the 2 certified envelopes on the counter. Both bore the same return address. Lyle Tran, attorney at law. Melanie's hair was still damp from her shower. Her robe hung open over a faded t-shirt. Dean's jaw worked as he turned one envelope over in his hands, thumb rubbing against the sealed flap. "You think this is—" he started. Melanie cut him off. "No, she wouldn't," Dean scoffed. "Wouldn't she, after dinner the other week?" Melanie's eyes flicked up. "You think she'd actually—" "I don't think," Dean snapped. "I know she's been acting off, cold, like she's keeping score." Melanie reached for a knife from the block, slit the first envelope, and slid out a crisp stack of legal pages. The paper was thick, official. Lyle Tran's header gleamed faintly in the light. She scanned the first paragraph, lips moving silently. Then she froze. Her fingers tightened around the pages. "Dean," she said quietly, "it says she's withdrawing from the mortgage. She's revoking all cosign responsibilities." Dean frowned. "That's not possible. The loan, she can't just—" "She did." Melanie thrust the papers toward him. "Look, she filed a credit liability partition. It says effective immediately." Dean's face went red, then pale. "What the hell? She can't just pull the rug like this. She's tied to those accounts." Melanie's voice cracked. "Not anymore." The kitchen went still. Only the hum of the refrigerator filled the air. Dean dropped into a chair, rubbing both hands down his face. "We need to call her." Melanie nodded slowly. "I'll do it." She dialed the number from muscle memory. It rang 3 times before rolling to voicemail. Her voice wavered but stayed polite. "Barbara, hi, it's Melanie. We just got, some legal documents from Lyle Tran's office, and I think there's been some kind of mistake. Maybe a mix-up? Just call me when you can." She hung up and stared at her phone. No callback came. Across town, Barbara sat in her den, reading an article about winter perennials. The phone buzzed once. She glanced at the screen, saw Melanie's name, and set it face down. Silence reclaimed the room. A few minutes later, Lyle's name flashed next. She answered. "It's done," he said. "All 3 packets acknowledged. Revocation clauses filed. The lenders already flagged the changes. They won't feel it yet, but when the next statements hit, it'll be undeniable." Barbara nodded, her voice steady. "This will pull the rug legally, not emotionally. That's the only kind of rug worth pulling," Lyle said. She hung up, looked out the window, and saw the rain finally stop. The street glistened under the lamplight, the world clean and cold again. She reached for her ledger, flipped to a new page, and wrote 2 words at the top in neat, confident script. Phase 2. And beneath it, she drew a single line. The next move would leave footprints. The first shock came as a number, 3,273 hours. Due November 1st. It landed in Dean's inbox on a Monday morning like any other, until he opened the email and blinked twice. Then again. His coffee went cold in his hand. "Why is this higher?" he muttered, scrolling down. The mortgage statement was clean, professional, and unmistakably real. His eyes caught the bolded line. Updated monthly due to FICO adjustment, cosigner removed. He read it again and again. The old payment, $2,864.10, was gone. Now it was $480 higher, nearly half a grand, every month. His hands were still on the keyboard when Melanie came in, hair still wet, phone in one hand and an energy bar in the other. He turned the screen toward her. "Look at this." She read silently, then blinked. "What the hell is a FICO adjustment?" Dean swallowed. They raise the interest. Because Barbara's off the loan now. Without her credit, we don't qualify for the old rate. Melanie's mouth parted slowly. "You said she'd never pull out." "I didn't think she would." "No." Melanie's tone sharpened. "You told me she wouldn't. That she'd keep covering the difference. That she'd always be there because you're her son." Dean didn't answer. Melanie slammed the energy bar on the counter. "Jesus, Dean. We're barely making it with her. Now we're short another $500 a month?" "She didn't warn me," he said weakly. "I didn't see this coming." Melanie turned away, pressing her palms hard into the edge of the counter. Her knuckles went white. "We already missed October's HOA payment. November's due next week." Dean rubbed his eyes. "We can juggle it. We'll pay the mortgage first. Let the HOA sit. They'll wait." Melanie turned back. "They fine you, Dean. They tack on late fees monthly. You don't just skip it." He didn't argue. What was there to say? Meanwhile, across town, Barbara stood in her kitchen sorting mail. Most of it was junk. One envelope, though, thin and ivory, addressed to all listed owners, caught her attention. She didn't need to open it to know. She already knew. Still, she slit the top with her letter opener and scanned the contents. Notice of delinquent Hoa Deuce, Oakview Estates, property, 423 Heather Lane, past due, $980. Next step, property line filing pending. Barbara circled the total with a pen, then folded the letter neatly back into its envelope. She pulled out her phone and snapped a photo of the document. Then she sent a message. To Lyle Tran, subject, HOA notice body, as discussed. Please proceed. A reply came 10 minutes later. Got it. Drafting a disclosure letter to legally separate your name from the account before lien action begins. They'll have 30 days to cover it or face escalation. You'll be clean. Barbara set the envelope aside, washed her hands slowly, then moved to her desk. The ledger was already open. She logged it carefully, in calm. Block lettering, Nover 6, HOA default, DHM, forwarded to LT, action pending. She drew a thin black line beneath it. Clean, clinical. Another domino knocked. Back in Oakview Estates, Melanie paced the bedroom like a caged animal. She was on the phone with the HOA's billing office, one hand fisted at her hip. What do you mean you've sent 2 notices? She snapped. No, we didn't receive anything. That must have gone to Barbara's address. She's listed on the account. A pause. Then her face fell. She's not? Melanie asked. She filed a removal notice? She hung up, stunned. Dean stood in the doorway, silent. Melanie turned toward him slowly. She's legally removed herself from the HOA account. Dean's mouth opened. That's not even... How is that? She knew this would happen, Melanie whispered. She waited for it. Dean said nothing. She just walked away, Melanie said again, almost to herself. Not just from the money, from us. And now she's cleaning up the wreckage before we even feel the quake. That night, Barbara poured herself a glass of wine and sat by the fire. The storm had passed. The air outside was crisp, almost sharp. She opened her laptop to find a new message from Lyle. Drafted. Default disclosure attached. If they fail to cure the balance, we'll move to lien defense and indemnity phase. You're shielded from impact. Barbara clicked the PDF. Scanned the lines. Her name, protected. Her stake, cleanly severed. A soft knock came from upstairs. Ruby? Barbara turned. Come in. Ruby peeked in. Got a weird voicemail from Aunt Melanie. Sounded off. She asked if you were okay. Barbara sipped her wine. I'm just fine. Ruby hesitated. You sure you don't want me to say something? Barbara smiled gently. I said everything I needed to, in writing. She turned back to the fire, letting the silence stretch. The phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. She let it ring. Then she picked up her pen and flipped to a fresh page in her ledger. Phase 3. She didn't need volume to make an impact, only precision and timing. Barbara waited until the rain had passed. The house was quiet, Sunday afternoon quiet, the kind where clocks tick louder and even the sound of breathing feels too present. Outside, the pavement still shimmered, wet and reflective. The trees bowed under the weight of the storm that had come and gone, like something had been wrung clean. She called up the stairs. Ruby, can you come down for a minute? There was a brief shuffle overhead. Then Ruby padded into the living room in socks and an oversized hoodie, a hair tie between her fingers. Barbara was already seated on the couch, a folder open across her lap. Not the fireproof one. This one was older, scuffed at the corners, soft from years of handling. Everything okay? Ruby asked, hesitating at the edge of the rug. Barbara nodded. Sit with me. Ruby lowered herself onto the couch. She glanced at the folder, then at her grandmother. What's going on? Barbara looked at her for a long moment. Then she turned the folder toward her and said simply, I want you to know the truth. She didn't wait for permission. She flipped the first page. A scanned check stub from 2012, mortgage payment for Dean and Melanie's first house. Then another, insurance premiums. HOA dues, emergency dental bills. A payment for Melanie's car insurance in 2015, property tax disbursements in 2017 and again in 2020. Ruby blinked, eyes darting back and forth across the rows of transactions. These are all you? Barbara nodded. Everyone. But they told me. Ruby stopped, swallowed. They always said you were relying on them, that you were staying afloat because they were helping. Barbara tilted her head, her voice quiet. That's the story they liked. Makes it easier to look generous when someone else is quietly paying the bill. She turned another page. Rental repairs, appliance replacements. A co-signed document for the SUV, her name inked neatly beside Dean's. I covered their lives, Barbara said. They called it kindness. Ruby sat back, jaw tight. They said you needed them, that they kept you in your house, that you wouldn't be able to. She stopped again. Jesus. Barbara didn't rush her. She waited. Ruby flipped through more of the records, organized, color-coded, dated in her grandmother's handwriting. Each one was a line in a quiet, unspoken history. I didn't do this to hurt them, Barbara said finally. I did this to stop hurting myself. That landed with weight. Ruby looked up slowly, and this time her eyes were damp. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Barbara gave a small smile. Because you were still hoping they'd change. Silence stretched again. Ruby reached for one of the pages, hesitated, then pulled her hand back. All those times Mom said you were asking for money. I was telling them the truth, that I couldn't keep carrying it forever, that I had limits. They turned that into a complaint. I feel like I've been lied to, Ruby whispered. Barbara reached over, placed a hand over hers. You weren't. Not directly. But they did what people like them do best. Confuse silence for consent. Ruby didn't speak. Instead, she leaned forward, arms sliding around Barbara's shoulders, and held her. No words, no explanations. Just an embrace that said, I see it now. And I believe you. Barbara closed her eyes. For the first time in a long time, she let herself rest inside someone else's recognition. Not pity, not guilt, just truth. When Ruby finally pulled back, she asked, What happens now? Barbara closed the folder. They're going to feel it soon, and they'll come to you, just like they came to me. Ruby straightened. What do I say? You say whatever you need to, but you know what's real now. That's enough. Outside, the wind picked up again. A branch scraped the side of the house like fingernails along brick. Ruby stood slowly. Do you want me to stay tonight? Barbara shook her head. No, you've got your place now. You earned that door. Ruby nodded. She hesitated again at the doorway, then turned back. You're stronger than they ever gave you credit for. Barbara looked down at the folder. No, I'm just not afraid of what happens when I stop saving people who never learn. Later that night, Barbara poured herself a cup of tea and sat at her desk. She flipped to her ledger. Under Phase 3, she added a new line. November 12. Ruby fully briefed. Alignment confirmed. She set down her pen. The line had been drawn. And this time, it wouldn't just be paper they'd feel. It would be the silence that finally answered them. The screenshot arrived while Barbara was pruning the rose bushes. Her phone buzzed once in her back pocket. Just one notification, not urgent. She finished deadheading the last stem before slipping off her gloves and checking the screen. It was from Janice. You're going to want to see this. Attached. Screenshot. Barbara tapped the image. It was a Facebook post. Melanie Stiles McConnell, November 14th, 10:23 a.m. Some people take and take until your well runs dry, and then try to make you feel guilty for needing help. Family isn't always what it should be. We're doing our best, even as others erase themselves from responsibility. Say a prayer for strength. The caption was paired with a photo of Ellie smiling in front of her school's community kindness tree. The irony wasn't subtle, nor was the message. Barbara stared at the post for a moment, then tapped share, save image, then forward. To Lyle Tran. Subject: Public narrative shift body. They're laying groundwork, logging for context. Attachment: Screenshot. She locked her phone, walked calmly inside, and set her gloves on the mudroom counter. Then she opened the bottom drawer of her file cabinet and pulled out a large manila envelope labeled in sharp black ink. Receipts: Dean, Melanie, 2012, present. She carried it to her desk, peeled the seal, and spread the contents across the wood surface like cards in a game she no longer had to bluff. One by one, she began scanning. Gas bills she'd paid when they couldn't. Dental bills covered without acknowledgement. Checks for summer camp deposits, new tires, orthodontist appointments, grocery money, cell phone bills. Each document flickered briefly on the screen as it passed under the scanner, and with each flicker, something inside her grew quieter. Not colder, not angrier, just finished. When the last receipt was saved, she created a new folder on her desktop. Stiles Estate Reclamation inside it, she saved 4 subfolders: housing support, vehicle cosigns, medical expenses, general bailouts. She labeled each scan with the date, amount, and method of payment. No dramatics, just facts, just truth. Later that afternoon, Barbara FaceTimed Janice. The call picked up mid-eye roll. I mean, they posted it publicly, Janice said, mouth full of almonds. They really think people don't remember who used to cover their rent? Barbara sipped from a mug of ginger tea, calm as ever. They gave me the narrative, Janice grinned. And you gave them notarized edits? Barbara laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. It bubbled out of her like something unscrewing from her ribs. It wasn't bitter, it was clear. You know, she said, Alan always said it's not the fire that burns you. It's the assumption it won't spread. Janice raised her mug. Well, looks like the flames are catching up. By Friday, Melanie's subscriptions began bouncing. Barbara didn't hear it firsthand, but she saw the fallout. An Instagram story from Melanie's Pilates studio tagged her with a generic "Thanks for the memories" post, code for a canceled autopay. Then came the Sephora membership deactivation. A digital paper trail she didn't chase, but Ruby did. Mom texted me today, Ruby said during their check-in call that evening. Asked if I could cover her grocery delivery until next Friday. I said no. Barbara didn't respond right away. She said things are tight because of outside circumstances, Ruby added, using air quotes. Then she said, your grandmother's choices are affecting more than just herself. Barbara's eyes narrowed. And you said? I said, they're finally affecting the people who made them. Then I muted the thread. Barbara nodded slowly. I'm proud of you, Ruby hesitated. It felt like punching down. No, Barbara said. It's what happens when someone finally stops cushioning a fall. Doesn't mean you caused the landing. That night, Barbara sat alone in the den with the fire low and steady. Her laptop glowed quietly beside her as she typed a note to Lyle. Subject: Request for addendum body, based on today's digital activity. They are attempting to frame public perception. Would like to preemptively gather rebuttal material just in case. She attached 6 documents, just enough, not everything. The rest she would keep. They'd taught her how to be silent. Now they would learn how long silence could echo. She reached for her ledger and turned to the final page in the Phase 3 tab. Novers 17, Public Narrative Manipulation. Logged, folder initiated. Sir. She tapped the pen gently against the page. Dean and Melanie had always loved the sound of their own version of events, but from now on, their story had a co-author. Dean stood at the kitchen island, phone to his ear, the Zillow listing open in front of him. Yeah, he said, trying to keep his voice light. 2-unit duplex, good location, corner lot. Could probably get you in for a tour by… Wait, what? He paused, lips tightening as the broker's response came through the speaker. She's still on the deed, he repeated. No, I thought we'd already… Look, I'm managing the property. I can get you the keys. Another pause. Dean exhaled, slow and bitter. Fine, I'll call you back. He hung up and set the phone down harder than he meant to. From the living room, Melanie looked up from her laptop. What happened? She's still on the damn title, Dean snapped. I can't sell without her consent. Melanie sat back, face pale. What about that clause? Didn't Lyle say we could buy her out? Dean shook his head. Not without her signature, and she's already triggered the partition clause. If we don't liquidate jointly, she can force a court-ordered sale. Melanie's mouth parted, then closed again. Dean's phone buzzed again. A message from Lyle. Notice received. Title split confirmed. Opposing party has 14 business days to initiate buyout or agree to auction. Dean dropped into a chair, staring at the floor like it had answers. Across town, Barbara sipped her tea and refreshed the online property listing. The duplex hadn't budged. She opened the second tab, the shared ownership contract, scrolled to the clause she'd flagged back in July. In the event of a breach or failure to maintain terms of co-ownership, either party may trigger forced liquidation via private auction or court-assigned trustee. She clicked send on the prepared notice Lyle had drafted and returned to her desktop folder. Styles Estate Reclamation, Real Assets, Duplex. She added a new note. Nov. 21, liquidation clause triggered, deadline set. That evening, Melanie listed 5 luxury handbags on Poshmark. Barbara didn't hear it from Ruby. She didn't need to. The listings popped up on her suggested items feed, algorithmic echoes of a life someone couldn't quite afford to hold on to. Gucci, YSL, a vintage Dior still in its dust bag. The captions were desperate and polished all at once. Gently loved, just in time for the holidays. Motivated seller. Barbara stared at the screen for a long moment, then clicked the Save for Later button, not to purchase, but to remember, to mark the moment the gloss started cracking. 2 days later, Lyle called. We're moving ahead, he said. Trustee assigned. Auction scheduled for December 9th. I've blocked them from delaying without penalty. Barbara nodded. Do I need to appear? Only if you want to see it fall apart in person. Barbara almost smiled. No, I've seen enough. On Friday, Tamara at the bank called her directly. Just a courtesy update, Tamara said, her voice low and gentle. I reviewed the shared account closures and flagged the connected activity per your standing request. Barbara leaned back in her chair, pen resting between her fingers. And? Their primary account is overdrawn. 3 pending charges declined this morning, streaming, auto pay on the HOA card, and a grocery delivery. Barbara was silent for a moment. Then, they're feeling it. They are, Tamara said. And they won't know how bad it is until Monday. Thank you, Barbara said. Please continue notifying me. Tamara hesitated. I don't usually say this, but I'm rooting for you. We all are, Barbara smiled. I'm not asking for revenge, Tamara. I'm just removing myself from their delusion. Sometimes that is the justice, Tamara replied. That night, Barbara sat on the back porch with a wool blanket over her knees and a journal open in her lap. She didn't write plans, not tonight. Tonight, she wrote a question. What do I want back when this ends? She underlined it once, closed the journal. Inside, her inbox chimed. One new message from Lyle. Subject: Final notice issued body. Per your instruction, the auction date has been locked. Any resistance will move the matter into legal default. The asset is no longer theirs to stall. Barbara closed her laptop. Her tea had gone cold. She didn't reheat it. Some things are best left where they settled. She walked inside and turned off the light. The denial came on a Wednesday. Melanie opened the email expecting confirmation, a formality, just a checkbox so she and Dean could assume the mortgage under her name alone, clean and final. Instead, the subject line punched harder than any balance sheet ever could. Application status: rejected, ineligible, due to credit score and debt-to-income ratio. She stared at it in silence. Dean walked in with 2 mugs of coffee, but paused when he saw her face. What? Melanie didn't answer. She just turned the screen toward him. Dean's lips tightened. No, that's not right. She scrolled down, slowly, like reading it slower would soften the blow. Your co-signer's removal has impacted your mortgage eligibility. Due to your current financial profile and existing liabilities, this application has been declined. Dean set the coffee down, untouched. Melanie's voice was flat. They're saying I'm not viable without her. Dean pressed a palm to his temple. Maybe if I call them. They already ran the numbers, she snapped. And it's not just my score. They flagged us. Dean fell silent. Melanie stood abruptly. You said she wouldn't pull the plug. You said... I thought she wouldn't, Dean barked. She's my mother, Melanie. I didn't think she'd burn the whole house down. Melanie laughed bitterly. She didn't burn it, Dean. She just stopped holding it up. Later that afternoon, Dean sat in his car parked outside an abandoned strip mall lot, phone to his ear, staring at the gray horizon. Barbara answered on the 3rd ring. Dean, she said, calm but unreadable. I'm not calling to argue, he said quickly. I wanted to ask if you'd reconsider. Just the mortgage. Nothing else. Barbara's reply was immediate. I already did. There was no malice in it, no raised voice, just fact. Dean swallowed hard. You know this will ruin us. You ruined the illusion, she said. I just stopped subsidizing it. He wanted to say something else, plead maybe, but there was nothing left to barter with. Not pride, not promises, not time. She hung up first. That evening, Melanie opened a new email from their financial advisor. The subject line was sterile. Debt strategy options, early stage consultation. She clicked it, scrolled, and stopped at the heading. Chapter 13, Restructuring Timeline, Initial Steps. She closed the laptop with shaking hands. Meanwhile, Barbara stood in her kitchen, sealing a certified envelope. She pressed the adhesive shut with her palm, then wrote the return address in her steady, looping script. Inside, the final severance agreement from Lyle. Full release of liability, complete withdrawal of ownership, co-signer privileges, and legal entanglement. 0 ties, 0 exposure. Across the top of the front page, Lyle had printed the header in bold. Final severance, Styles, family estate, and accounts. She placed the envelope in her outgoing tray and picked up the phone. Did it go out? Janice asked on the 1st ring. Barbara smiled faintly. Just now. Well, Janice said. Congratulations. You just disinherited them while they were still living in your shadow. Barbara laughed once, quiet, dry, but full of release. No lawyers, no screaming, just a pen. Janice whistled. They'll be choking on the silence for years. Barbara looked out the window. The trees had finally dropped their last leaves. The branches stood bare now. Honest, unhidden. I don't want their apology, she said. I just wanted the weight gone. You got that and then some, Janice said. Now watch. This is the part where they pretend you left them stranded. They stranded themselves, Barbara said. I just stopped patching the raft. By week's end, the HOA notice arrived. Property, 423 Heather Lane. Notice of foreclosure warning, stage 1. A copy went to Barbara, out of protocol. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. She scanned the envelope, forwarded it to Lyle, then dropped it in the shredder without reading. Across town, Melanie was on hold with the mortgage servicer, her voice hoarse from repeating herself. Dean was pacing the hall in socks, checking his phone every 60 seconds. The kitchen was dark. The fridge made a low, groaning sound. The silence wasn't just financial anymore. It had come for the rooms. That night, Barbara logged one final note in her ledger. November 29, mortgage assumption denied, foreclosure initiated, final severance filed. She paused, then underlined the last phrase once. Final. She set down the pen, then closed the book. The hearing took place on a gray Tuesday in early December. The courthouse was a squat concrete building 2 towns over, the kind with cracked steps and humming fluorescent lights. It smelled faintly of printer toner and old carpet. No press, no cameras, just a docket, a clerk, and a line of ruined people in uncomfortable shoes. Dean sat 2 rows back, shoulders hunched, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles looked bloodless. Melanie sat beside him, a stack of manila folders on her lap, one eye twitching from lack of sleep or too much caffeine, or both. Barbara wasn't there. She didn't need to be. She'd submitted her full record weeks ago, scanned and bound into exhibits, the scanned receipts, the auto drafts, the ledger entries in her crisp cursive, each one notarized and cross-referenced by Lyle Tran. She didn't speak on her own behalf because she didn't have to. The documents did. The court clerk called their case number. The judge, a woman in her early 60s with horn-rimmed glasses and a steady voice, leaned into the microphone and began reading. Case number 84, How 2023, petitioners Dean McConnell and Melanie Stiles McConnell, requesting structured relief under Chapter 13. Preliminary review of Schedule J indicates significant financial overextension and misrepresentation of asset history. She paused. Attached exhibits from former co-signer Barbara McConnell provide. Another pause as the judge adjusted her glasses. A detailed timeline of over 11 years of parental subsidy for adult expenses. This includes mortgage payments, vehicle cosigns, insurance premiums, and general living costs. She looked up. Are the petitioners disputing any portion of this documentation? Dean's lawyer stood awkwardly. We acknowledge the record, Your Honor, but would emphasize that the petitioners believe the support was informal and ongoing. Melanie choked out a laugh, a thin, splintered sound. The judge looked at her. I'm sorry, Melanie said quickly, blinking hard. It's just... She turned off everything, all at once. It wasn't gradual. The judge leaned back. That's not uncommon. When the source of support was never meant to be permanent, and the recipients chose to ignore that reality. Dean shifted beside her, jaw clenched. The judge turned a page. Petition is approved under restructured terms due to documented mismanagement of finances and reliance on unreported external support. This court finds that the debt was not incurred in good faith. She tapped her pen once on the file. Property assets will be liquidated at auction. Payment schedule to remaining creditors will be formalized by the trustee. Petitioners will retain no discretionary accounts during repayment period. Melanie's breath hitched. Her folders slid from her lap to the floor with a soft thud. Dean didn't move. Across town, Barbara sat at her dining table, a cup of tea steeping beside her untouched. The house was clean, still. Her phone buzzed once, a message from Lyle. Judgment entered, full ruling attached, properties sold. Your equity portion will be wired within 48 hours. No further appearances required. Barbara didn't open the PDF. Instead, she walked to the front window and pulled back the curtain. The street was empty. Bare trees swayed gently against the dusk. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to log anything. It had been said out loud. Not by her, by a judge, by a court, by the law. Later that night, Janice called. I saw the filing online, she said. Chapter 13, liquidation, seizure, the whole meal. Barbara said nothing for a beat. Then, she cried in court. Oh? She told the judge I turned everything off. Janice exhaled sharply. I mean, she's not wrong. Barbara smiled faintly. She finally noticed the power was mine. Well, Janice said, you didn't just flip a switch. You rewired the entire house. Barbara poured herself a glass of wine. No toast, just one long sip. I was never trying to punish them, she said quietly. I know, Janice replied, but you did make them face what they refused to see. Barbara nodded once. That I was the floor beneath their feet. And now? Barbara looked at the empty hallway, quiet and warm. Now they know what falling feels like. The letter to Ruby wasn't typed. Barbara wrote it by hand, slow and deliberate, her cursive steady as ever. The stationery was pale blue, the kind Alan used to buy in bulk from that tiny store on Oak and Riverside, the one that smelled like cedar and ink. She kept the letter short. Ruby, you owe me nothing. Not for the past, not for staying, and not for choosing to see it. You don't need to fix what they broke or carry what they dropped. Just live clearly, cleanly, with a spine and a softness they never earned. That's enough. I love you. Grandma B. She folded it once, tucked it into a cream envelope, and placed it beside a small pressed flower from the backyard hydrangeas. Then she sealed it and left it in the outgoing tray. No dramatic handoff. No conversation. Just the kind of quiet that lasted longer than noise. 2 days later, the final check cleared. Barbara watched the deposit confirmation roll in. 6 figures, wired into her personal trust account by the bankruptcy trustee. The subject line read simply, Equity Disbursement, Styles, Buyout Complete. It wasn't joy she felt. It wasn't even relief. It was completion. She stood from her desk, walked to the kitchen, and tore the old ledger in half. No ceremony, just precision. Then she pulled out a new file, the first entry, Deck 8. Transfer $30,000 to West County Legal Aid. She made the donation in Alan's name, quietly. No press release, no plaque. Just a direct fund earmarked for single parents in housing court without legal representation. Then she drafted the second transfer, Establish, Alan McConnell Memorial Housing Grant, Annual Scholarship for Community College Students aging out of foster care. Janice called just as the wire confirmation came through. You did it, she said. You flipped a bankruptcy into a blessing. Barbara nodded to herself. Exactly, Janice chuckled. Because you did the books. Barbara smiled. Because I always did the books. That afternoon, she walked down to the post office with her tote bag over one shoulder and the final stack of closure notices tucked neatly inside. Each one a boundary drawn in ink. Title removals, lien waivers, equity releases. She dropped them in the mailbox like receipts for a life she no longer had to explain. On the walk back, the air was brisk and dry, winter settling in without drama. A few teenagers skateboarded down the sidewalk ahead of her. Somewhere nearby, someone was grilling, not burgers, maybe chicken, and the scent curled through the cold. She slowed at the corner near the old church and looked across the street at the vacant lot they'd once talked about buying. Alan had wanted to put in a little hardware store there, something simple. It was just weeds now, but she didn't feel regret. She felt space. Back home, her phone buzzed. Ruby, I got your letter. I cried in my car and then bought myself groceries with my own money. It felt like the right response. Love you too. Barbara read it twice, smiling. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Some connections don't require an echo. That night, she poured 2 glasses of wine, set one in front of Alan's urn, then took her own to the back porch. The wind rattled the wind chimes gently, like fingers running over hollow bones. You wouldn't have liked how long I waited, she said aloud. But I got there. I finally balanced it. The chimes stirred again. Barbara looked out at the yard. Everything had been stripped bare for winter, but nothing looked dead. It just looked honest. Barbara heard the car pull into the driveway before she saw it. She was in the kitchen folding dish towels, the sun slanting low across the tile. The knock came a moment later, 3 times. Too familiar to be a stranger, too unsure to be anyone welcome. She didn't move. Through the narrow front window, she saw Melanie standing on the porch. Hair pulled back tight, face drawn, posture stiff with the kind of desperation that still wanted to look composed. Her coat wasn't warm enough for December, and the skin under her eyes was bruised with fatigue. Barbara leaned back against the counter and waited. Melanie raised her hand and knocked again, softer this time. We just need time, she said, voice cracking on the word need. Barbara didn't respond, didn't shift, didn't blink. On the porch across the street, Ruth Singleton, Barbara's neighbor of nearly 20 years, looked up from her knitting and watched. She squinted over the rim of her glasses and called across the lawn, voice casual but not unkind. You need me to call anyone? Melanie turned, startled, then shook her head too fast. No, I'm fine. Barbara didn't move from her place in the kitchen. A minute passed, then another. Eventually, Melanie stepped off the porch. She paused at the mailbox, pulled a small envelope from her purse, and slid it inside. Then she got in the car and left. Barbara waited until the sound of tires faded entirely. Then she stepped outside, calm and steady, as if she were checking the weather. She opened the mailbox, took out the envelope, and looked at the handwriting on the front. Her name, no salutation, no mom, just Barbara. She turned it over once, then carried it inside, straight to the shredder in the hallway office. The letter slid in with a low whir, disappearing inch by inch until only confetti fell into the bin. Barbara returned to the kitchen. The dish towels were still there. So was her peace. That evening, the doorbell rang again. One chime. No knock. Barbara opened it without hesitation this time. Ruby stood on the porch in a heavy coat and soft boots. Her hair pulled into a low braid. She didn't speak, just looked at her grandmother, face open, waiting. Barbara stepped back and held the door wide. No questions, no explanations, just a full, unflinching welcome. Ruby stepped inside. Behind them, the wind picked up. It carried the last leaves from the lawn and pulled them down the street, like it knew they didn't belong here anymore. The appeal didn't last long. Barbara saw it in the public record first, filed electronically at 9:42 a.m. on a Tuesday. A last-ditch effort, desperation dressed up in legalese, a motion to challenge the court's liquidation ruling and request a stay on the foreclosure. By Thursday morning, it was denied. Ruling, appeal dismissed. 48-hour review, complete reason. Filed in bad faith. Fines applied for procedural abuse. Lyle forwarded her the full PDF with a brief subject line. They're out of lifelines. Barbara read the first paragraph, then closed the file. Across town, Melanie threw her phone across the room. It hit the carpet with a muffled thud. Dean just sat there, head in his hands, staring at the table where a stack of unopened bills leaned to one side like a slow-motion collapse. The fine had come through at $200. Court costs, filing fees. A note from the clerk's office attached to the email. Future filings must be reviewed for merit. Additional sanctions may apply. Then came the email from their financial advisor. Not cold, not cruel, just final. We believe it's no longer productive for our firm to continue advising your household. We wish you the best going forward. Melanie didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just sat down, then stared at the blank wall until the sun dipped behind the trees. Barbara spent that afternoon in her study, with Lyle on speakerphone and her desk meticulously organized. Folders labeled, documents aligned like cutlery in a drawer. They were finalizing the trust. She signed the last page, then flipped to the beneficiary designation form. Her handwriting didn't shake. Primary beneficiary, Ruby S. McConnell contingent. None. She tapped the pen against the desk once, then twice, then set it down. Lyle's voice came through the line. That's it. It's done. Barbara nodded. Thank you. You're clean, protected, and everything's assigned. No probate, no interference. Barbara smiled. No ghosts. Lyle chuckled lightly. Not even the kind with credit scores. Later that evening, Ruby stood beside the fireplace, watching the flames flicker low. Barbara poured her a mug of tea and handed it over wordlessly. Ruby took a slow sip, then asked, You still had room for legacy after all that? Barbara took her own cup and sat. That was always the plan, she said. They were just placeholders. Ruby's eyes softened. That's cold. No, Barbara said, meeting her gaze. That's accurate. They sat there for a long time, not speaking, just letting the silence fill in the outlines of everything that had once been murky. Then Ruby reached for the trust binders sitting on the side table. She flipped through it slowly, the grants, the distributions, the clean asset listings. Not a trace of Dean or Melanie. Did you mean to leave it this clean? She asked. Barbara nodded. You only pass on what you've made peace with. Ruby turned another page. So what happens next? Barbara smiled faintly. I stopped building shields for people who kept trying to shoot through them. At 7:17 p.m., Melanie called. Barbara saw her name flash across the screen. She let it ring. She didn't need to hear what came after a denied appeal. She didn't need to hear how could you again, or you left us with nothing. They still didn't understand. She hadn't left them with nothing. They'd built nothing. She'd simply moved out of the scaffolding. Before bed, Barbara opened her journal and wrote just one line. Deck 14. Legacy designated. Story closed. No return mail. She clicked the pen shut, placed it neatly beside her reading glasses, and turned off the light. The town hall was modest. Peach walls, worn wood floors, and a makeshift podium borrowed from the Rotary Club. A few rows of folding chairs were half filled with neighbors and local board members, the kind who always brought casseroles to fundraisers and knew your birthday without checking Facebook. Barbara didn't want a ceremony, but she agreed to it when the director of West County Legal Aid said the plaque would go in their lobby. Not for donors, the woman had explained. For the people who walk in with nothing but debt and a single thread of hope. So she came. Ruby sat in the second row, hands folded in her lap. Janice sat on the aisle, big sunglasses, floral scarf, clapping before the speaker had even started. Barbara didn't know everyone in the room. That was fine. She wasn't there to be recognized. She was there to mark something ending, and something better beginning. The speaker, someone young, passionate, overly caffeinated, gave a short speech about transformative giving and financial clarity as a form of quiet revolution. Barbara listened politely, but not intently. She only tuned in when her name was called. She stood, walked to the podium without fanfare, took the plaque in her hands like it was something heavier than it looked. The inscription read, "For financial clarity, backbone, and quiet power," presented to Barbara McConnell, for showing what it means to end cycles, not repeat them. She didn't give a speech. She nodded, whispered thank you. Janice clapped the loudest. Ruby stood too. Barbara sat down again, plaque in her lap, as the event shifted to coffee and cookies and murmured congratulations. That night, she placed the plaque on the bookshelf across from the fireplace, next to Alan's urn. It didn't shine like a trophy. It just belonged. 2 days later, the title paperwork came in the mail. The deed was hers, sole owner, 0 encumbrances, no co-signers, no liens, no ghosts. She signed it, filed the copy with Lyle, and made the note in her new ledger, crisp and narrow and almost entirely blank. Deck 17, title cleared, home secured, future intact. She closed the book and looked around. The house didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt honest. Across town, 40 minutes outside of it to be exact, Dean and Melanie unpacked cardboard boxes in a rental duplex with no porch, no hydrangeas, and laminate floors that creaked in all the wrong places. There were no framed photos yet, no family heirlooms, just utility bills already overdue and a fridge that hummed too loud. They hadn't heard from Barbara. They didn't expect to. No keys, no claims, no contact. Just the dull ache of a door that stayed closed long after they stopped knocking. Barbara didn't celebrate. She planted tulips instead. Knee-deep in cold soil, gloves damp, hands steady, she dug small, even holes around the edge of the garden bed. One for each thing she had let go: debt, grief, silence, apology. The burden of being needed more than she was respected. Ruby came by after work and watched her for a moment from the gate. "You always this poetic with your landscaping?" she asked. Barbara grinned. "Only when it's spring I'm planting in winter." Ruby stepped inside and closed the gate behind her. "Dinner?" "In the oven." They went inside together. That night, after Ruby had gone home, Barbara poured herself a glass of wine and sat down at her desk. No ledgers, no files, just a small notepad. At the top, she wrote a single sentence, not a record, not a log, a declaration. "My son and daughter-in-law said, 'We're done helping you,' so I helped them into bankruptcy. They should have checked whose name was really holding everything up." She tapped the page once with the back of her pen. Then she smiled.